Welcome to True Crime Threads. A son uncovers his mother's deadly secret. For years, Peter had lived in what seemed like the perfect family. His mother, Ella, was the epitome of a loving, attentive parent, always present, always caring. She knew how to make their house feel like a safe haven, free from the chaos of the outside world. There was never a time when Peter questioned the warmth and security she provided, and as a child he believed his family was just like everyone else's, unremarkable but steady. His father, Stephen, worked as a mechanic in a small garage, often working long hours, but Peter never felt neglected. Their home was modest but full of love. Family dinners were sacred, and every weekend the three of them would venture out for something special, whether it was a trip to the park or a quiet afternoon at the movies. They made it work, and to Peter that was enough. Ella's nurturing personality extended beyond the home, as she was well-liked in the community. She worked part-time at a local bookstore, where her charm and easy smile made her popular with the regular customers. The other parents in their neighborhood admired her for her devotion to their family and praised her for always being so involved in the local events and charity drives. She was the kind of mother everyone could count on, always with a listening ear or an offer of help when someone was in need. Her friendship seemed genuine, and her kindness had a magnetic pull that drew people to her. Peter's father, Stephen, was a quiet man. He was strong, hard-working, and dependable, but he wasn't particularly expressive. He didn't need to be. His love for Ella and Peter was evident in his actions, even if he didn't say much. He was a man of few words, but Peter always knew that Stephen would do anything for his family. His work as a mechanic kept him busy, and when he wasn't fixing cars, he was out in the garage tinkering with old engines or helping neighbors with their repairs. Though his father wasn't one for long conversations, Peter loved him deeply, and they shared a bond over their quiet moments together. It wasn't until Peter became a teenager that he started noticing small things about his mother that didn't add up. He caught glimpses of strange behavior, like how she would sometimes stare off into space, as though lost in thought, her eyes distant and far away. There were odd, unexplained late nights when she would leave the house under the guise of running errands, only to return hours later, always acting like nothing had happened. Peter's curiosity grew as he began to realize that these little things didn't match up with the perfect image of his family life that had been painted for him over the years. Ella's mood swings became more frequent. One moment she was warm and affectionate, but the next she would be withdrawn or snappy. Peter had never seen this side of her when he was younger, and it left him feeling uneasy. There were moments when he thought he saw her looking at him with an unreadable expression, as though she were contemplating something he couldn't understand. He would often catch her glancing at old photographs of their family, some of which he didn't recognize, and then quickly putting them away. It seemed harmless at first, but something in her behavior started to unsettle him. Peter tried to talk to his father about it, but Stephen always brushed it off, saying things like, "Your mother's just tired," or "It's nothing, son." "Don't worry about it." The reassuring words from his father did little to calm Peter's growing suspicion. He didn't want to question his mother. He loved her too much, but something inside him began to stir. Maybe it was the growing sense that the life he had always known was just a facade, or perhaps it was the feeling that the truth about his family was slipping through his fingers, and he was powerless to hold on to it. The tension in the house was subtle, but it was there. Peter began to sense that his mother was hiding something from him, something important, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. As the days went by, Peter found himself paying closer attention to every little detail, searching for a clue that could unravel the mystery of what was going on in his family. But no matter how much he tried, Ella always seemed to have an answer, a smile, or a gentle reassurance that made everything seem like it was perfectly fine. And for a time, Peter believed it. He had no choice but to, for the truth was something he wasn't ready to face. It wasn't until Peter moved back home after finishing college that the cracks in his once perfect view of his family began to widen. He had been away for several years, living in a dorm, focusing on his studies, and enjoying the freedom of being away from home. But when he returned, the house felt different, quieter, less vibrant. Ella, though still as kind and nurturing as ever, seemed distant, distracted even. There was a sharpness to her that wasn't there before, as though a shadow lingered just behind her eyes. Stephen, on the other hand, was more withdrawn than Peter remembered, spending long hours in the garage and coming home late, often without much to say. They had slipped into routines, and the warmth of their family life seemed to have dimmed, replaced by a palpable tension in the air. Peter had expected to feel comforted when he returned, to slide right back into the life he'd once known. But something felt off. His mother's smile seemed forced, and the conversations they once shared over dinner were now punctuated by awkward silences. Ella was still the same in many ways. She cooked meals, kept the house clean, and made sure Peter felt at home, but there was something different about her presence, something elusive. It was as though she was hiding a part of herself from him, something she wasn't willing to share. One evening, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, Peter came across a collection of things he had long forgotten about: childhood toys, old school projects, and various family mementos. As he dug deeper, something caught his eye: an old wooden box, carefully tucked away beneath a pile of forgotten belongings. The box wasn't particularly large, but it had a weight to it, an air of secrecy that intrigued Peter. He set aside the dusty items and carefully lifted the box into his lap. It was locked, but Peter didn't hesitate. He found an old key in the drawer nearby, one that seemed to fit perfectly. His curiosity burned as he slowly unlocked the box. Inside, he found a collection of letters, dozens of them, all carefully folded and neatly stacked. They were yellowed with age, some slightly torn, others stained with what appeared to be ink smudges. All of them were addressed to someone named Stephen. At first, Peter thought it was a mistake, perhaps a misaddressed letter. But as he began reading the first few, he realized they weren't the kind of letters one might write to a friend or family member. These were intimate, full of longing, affection, and most unsettling of all, a sense of desperation. Ella's words bled through the pages, and Peter could feel the raw emotion she had poured into them. The letters were filled with expressions of love, but there was also something darker about them. Ella wrote of needing to escape, of yearning for freedom from something she never named. The tone was familiar but strange, like a side of his mother Peter had never known existed. The letters spoke of a plan, something that Ella and Stephen had discussed, something that involved secrecy and deception. Peter's heart began to race as he read more, each sentence pulling him deeper into a mystery that had been hidden right under his nose for years. The deeper he went into the letters, the more he realized that his mother's relationship with Stephen wasn't as simple as he had once believed. The final letter he read sent chills down his spine. Ella wrote of a promise to leave behind everything she had known, to start anew, but it was unclear whether this was a plan for the future or a regret for the past. The more Peter read, the more he questioned everything he thought he knew about his mother. The perfect family he had always imagined had never existed, at least, not in the way he had believed. There was something much more complex and sinister beneath the surface, and the truth was staring him in the face, hidden within the words of these long-forgotten letters. Peter knew he had to find out more. He couldn't stop now. His mind raced with questions, each one more disturbing than the last. What had his mother been involved in all those years ago? What was the plan she spoke of? And who was Stephen really? He had no answers, only a growing sense of dread that something much darker was about to come to light. The past had a way of catching up with people, and Peter could feel it breathing down his neck. Peter's suspicion deepened with every passing day. The letters had given him a glimpse into a side of his mother that he couldn't quite reconcile with the woman he had always known. Ella had always been the epitome of stability, the heart of their family, and now Peter found himself wondering if that stability had been built on lies. He couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something was wrong, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized he needed to know the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. It wasn't just the letters that troubled him. There were other things, small details that didn't add up. Peter had begun noticing the subtle shifts in Ella's behavior over the past few weeks. She was often more distracted, preoccupied with thoughts that seemed to pull her away from the present moment. Her conversations lacked their usual warmth and ease, replaced by pauses as if she were carefully selecting her words. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't paying attention, Peter caught her staring out of the window, her expression distant, almost haunted. It was as though something was lurking in her mind just beyond her reach, but she couldn't shake it. The strangest part of all was her unexplained absences. On several occasions, Ella would tell Peter she was going to run errands or meet a friend, but she would return hours later, as though she had been somewhere far away. She never gave details of where she had gone or what she had been doing. Peter noticed she was often a little too composed when she came back, as if she were trying to convince herself that everything was normal. These late-night outings seemed out of character for someone so dedicated to her family, and the more he thought about it, the more it disturbed him. One evening, Peter decided to follow her. He had to know what she was up to, what she was hiding. He waited until she told him she was going out for a few hours, and without saying a word, he quietly followed her. His heart raced as he watched Ella drive out of their quiet suburban neighborhood and head toward the edge of town. The streets grew darker, and the houses more spaced apart. Peter's mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, none of them comforting. Where was she going at this hour? What could be so important? She eventually turned down a narrow, dimly lit road that led to a part of town Peter wasn't familiar with. It was an area he had never had reason to visit, a place that seemed a little too quiet, a little too forgotten. Ella's car slowed as she approached a dilapidated building, its windows boarded up and its paint peeling. Peter parked a few blocks away and watched as she stepped out of the car and disappeared into the building. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. This was no place for a mother to be at this time of night, not when she was supposed to be running errands. Peter waited, his mind swirling with questions, unable to shake the sense that he was on the verge of discovering something terrible. After what felt like an eternity, Ella emerged from the building, her face unreadable, and she quickly got back into the car. Peter hesitated for a moment, torn between confronting her or finding out more. His instincts screamed at him to confront her, but he knew that would only raise more questions without answers. As Ella drove away, Peter cautiously approached the building. The air felt cold, and the silence was overwhelming. There was an eerie stillness in the place, as though no one had been there for years. Peter felt a strange compulsion to see what she had been doing inside. He carefully approached the entrance, finding the door slightly ajar. His heart raced as he pushed it open, stepping into the darkness. The smell of mildew and rot filled the air. Dust covered every surface, and the place had a neglected, abandoned feel. It was clear no one had used the building in a long time. Peter crept through the hallways, his footsteps muffled by the old floorboards. At the back of the building, he discovered a door that had been bolted shut. He knew he shouldn't, but his curiosity overtook him. He pried the door open, just enough to peek inside. The sight made his blood run cold. The room was filled with old photographs, some framed, others stacked in piles. There were men in the pictures strangers to Peter, but their faces seemed strangely familiar. It took him a moment to recognize one of them, the man from the letters. Stephen. The shock hit him like a punch to the gut. The man who had been part of his mother's past, the man whose letters had filled him with so many questions, was here, somehow linked to this place. But there was something else, something far more unsettling. Among the photos was a single image of a child, a boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old. His face was soft, innocent, and strikingly familiar. Peter's breath caught in his throat as he realized the boy in the photograph looked just like him. The room seemed to close in around him. His hands shook as he backed away from the door, the weight of the discovery sinking in. His mother's past wasn't just a series of secrets, it was a twisted, terrifying story that now seemed to have him at its center. The more Peter uncovered, the more he realized the depth of the secret his mother had hidden from him for so long. The photographs he had found in that abandoned building were just the beginning, the first clue in a tangled web of deceit, crime, and loss. Each revelation seemed to peel away another layer of the carefully constructed world Ella had built for their family, leaving Peter with an unsettling sense that nothing had been as it seemed. Peter's growing dread only intensified when he began digging into the town's old newspapers. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the yellowing pages, reading through decades of headlines and articles. His search was aimless at first, but then one particular article caught his eye. The headline read, "Local family disappears without a trace. The search for answers continues." The names listed were unfamiliar at first, but as he read further, something clicked. The missing family had been last seen near the same rundown building where he had followed his mother. The article went on to mention that the family had vanished without a trace, and no evidence had ever been found to explain their disappearance. The case had gone cold, and the authorities had stopped investigating after a few years. Peter felt a cold shiver run down his spine. As he read the details of the article, he realized the timeline matched up with the strange photographs he had seen. This wasn't just an old case. This was personal. The family that had disappeared, another man, a woman, and their child had been living in the same neighborhood as Peter's family at one point. The boy in the photographs, the one who looked so much like him, was the child who had vanished. He was the son of the family that had disappeared, the boy who had been a part of his mother's past, and whose fate had now become entwined with Peter's own. Peter could hardly believe what he was reading. His mind raced as he connected the dots. His mother's letters, her strange behavior, the old photos, and now this everything seemed to point to the same conclusion: Ella had been involved in something terrible. The boy in the picture was not just some forgotten memory from her past, he was a part of a crime that had haunted the town for years. But why had she never told Peter? Why had she kept this secret for so long? As he pieced together the fragmented story, Peter realized that Ella's past wasn't just marked by love and longing, it was marked by violence. She had been involved in the disappearance of the family in some way, perhaps even as an accomplice. The more Peter thought about it, the more it became clear that the man in the photos, Stephen, had to be more than just a lover or an old acquaintance. He had been tied to these crimes, orchestrating something far darker than Peter had ever imagined. Peter's thoughts turned to his father. Stephen had always been a quiet man, a man of few words, but Peter had never suspected him to be capable of anything like this. Had Stephen known about his wife's involvement in the disappearance of the family? Had he been complicit in their deaths, or had he been an unwitting accomplice to Ella's dark secret? The questions piled up, but none of the answers made sense. Every time Peter thought he was getting closer to the truth, another layer of confusion clouded his judgment. Desperation set in. Peter knew he had to confront Ella, to demand the truth from her, but he was terrified of what she might reveal. What would she say? Could he even trust her after everything he had discovered? If she had been capable of keeping such a monstrous secret, what else was she hiding? The love he had always felt for his mother had been tainted by doubt, and the woman he had once looked up to now seemed like a stranger, someone who could betray him at any moment. The thought of confronting her made Peter's stomach turn. He wasn't ready to hear what she had to say, but at the same time he knew he had no other choice. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. He had to find out what had happened to the missing family, and he had to learn why his mother had been so involved in their disappearance. But deep down, Peter knew that once he opened that door, there would be no going back. The truth, no matter how horrifying, would change everything: his family, his perception of his mother, and the life he had once taken for granted. The confrontation had been inevitable. The weight of the secrets that Peter had uncovered was unbearable. His mind was a storm of emotions: betrayal, fear, anger, but above all, there was an overwhelming sense of confusion. Ella had been the cornerstone of his life, the one person who had always been there, who had kept everything together. How could she have been involved in something so monstrous? How could she have kept such a dark secret hidden for so long? And why? The questions gnawed at him, and he knew that he needed answers, no matter the cost. Peter waited for a quiet moment, when Stephen was in the garage and there were no distractions. Ella was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, her usual calm demeanor in place. He approached her slowly, the papers he had found in the attic clenched tightly in his hand. She didn't notice him standing in the doorway at first, but when she turned and saw the look in his eyes, her expression faltered for a split second. That moment of hesitation told Peter everything he needed to know. She knew what was coming. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." Ella set down the knife she had been using to chop vegetables and wiped her hands on a towel. Her face tightened, but she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Peter's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of the conversation pressing down on him, but he had no choice but to move forward. He had to know the truth. "I found the letters," he said, his voice steady but full of accusation, "and I found the building." And the photographs. His eyes locked onto hers, searching for any sign of guilt. "I know what you've been hiding, Mom. I know about the family that disappeared. I know about the boy." Ella's face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks, and for a moment she seemed to be struggling with her emotions. Her eyes flickered with something: fear, shame, maybe even guilt, but she quickly masked it, replacing it with a coldness Peter had never seen before. She straightened her back and looked at him with a look that was part pleading, part defiance. "Peter, you don't understand," she began, her voice shaking. "There's so much more to it than you realize. I never wanted you to know about this. I never wanted you to be part of it." Peter's stomach twisted. "Then tell me, Mom. Tell me everything. I need to know the truth." Ella took a deep breath, her eyes downcast as if the weight of the past was too much for her to bear. She moved to the kitchen table and sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a moment she was silent, her gaze far away as if she were reliving something painful. Peter felt his breath catch in his throat, his body tense with anticipation. "It was years ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was young, and I was lost. I had just met Stephen, and everything felt like it was falling apart. I was in a bad place. And then I met them, the other family. They were new in town, and they had a son. A little boy. I never meant for things to go the way they did, but something happened. Something I can't explain. It started with small things, things I shouldn't have gotten involved in. And before I knew it, we were all caught up in something horrible." Peter could barely breathe as she spoke. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they created was something he could barely comprehend. "You have to understand," Ella continued, her voice trembling now. "I wasn't the same person I am now. I didn't know how to escape. Stephen and I," she stopped, as though unable to say the words. Peter's mind raced. "You didn't just know about it. You were part of it," he said, the realization dawning on him with terrifying clarity. Ella's eyes welled with tears, and she nodded, slowly, almost imperceptibly. "Yes, I was part of it. Stephen and I, we were involved. But it wasn't what you think. We didn't do it out of malice. There were things going on that I can't even explain. Things that don't make sense now, but at the time it felt like there was no way out." Peter's mind reeled. His own mother, his kind, loving mother, had been involved in a crime, one that had ruined lives, one that had been buried for years. The boy, Peter said, barely able to speak the words. The boy in the pictures. He couldn't bring himself to finish. Ella's face crumpled with grief. "He was my son," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The boy who disappeared, the boy you look so much like, was my child. My first child. But he's gone now, and I couldn't live with what we had done. I had to leave it behind. I had to create a new life. A life for you and Stephen. I never wanted you to know any of this, Peter. I never wanted you to feel the burden of what I had done. The weight of her words hit Peter like a physical blow. His mind spun, trying to make sense of what she was saying, but it was too much. His mother had not just kept a secret, she had built an entirely new life on the foundation of lies, a life that had cost someone else everything. He didn't know how to feel. Anger? Sadness? Betrayal? All of those emotions surged within him, but they couldn't compare to the overwhelming sense of disbelief that consumed him. Peter stared at his mother, the woman who had once been his rock, now broken before him. And in that moment he understood that the truth was never simple, and the past had a way of catching up with people, no matter how hard they tried to bury it.